You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Well, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has stepped down as Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz president, paving the way for his elder brother Nawaz Sharif to once again become the party president. Meanwhile, the situation remains tense in PoK as the strike continues. 8 years after concluding the general framework of cooperation on the Chabahar Port in Iran, India and Iran have signed a 10-year contract for its operation. The United States, meanwhile, warns anyone considering business deals with Iran, they need to be aware of the potential risk of sanctions. Russian President Vladimir Putin tapped civilian economist as his surprise new defense minister in an attempt to gird Russia for economic war by trying to better utilize the defense budget. Donald Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, testified in court that Trump personally approved a hush money payment to bury a porn star's story of sexual encounter before it could derail his 2016 campaign. Israeli forces continue to advance in Rafah and launched another operation against Hamas in the north, setting off a desperate scramble among war-weary civilians across Gaza. Well, our big focus, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has stepped down as Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz president, saying the time has come for his elder brother and former Premier Nawaz Sharif to resume his rightful place as the party chief. The party confirmed the development and shared the resignation of Shehbaz Sharif on X, but in the resignation letter addressed to the PMLN Secretary General, Prime Minister Shehbaz cited the tumultuous events of 2017 actually, which resulted in the unjust disqualification of his elder brother from the Prime Minister's office and the presidency of the party. The Premier said this. He said he was entrusted with the responsibility of assuming the presidency of the party. Now, if you retrace, in 2017, the Pakistan Supreme Court had disqualified Nawaz as Premier and party president for his alleged corruption in cases related to the Panama Papers revelations about his illegal wealth stashed abroad. He relinquished his position within the party following his disqualification, which also led to his departure from the Prime Minister's office. Meanwhile, the Pakistani government has allocated 23 billion Pakistani rupees for immediate release to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir in order to quell simmering unrest in the region, where the situation has remained tense as the total strike against high prices of wheat flour, inflated electricity bills and taxes now enters its 5th day. A police officer was killed and 100 others were injured in fresh clashes over the weekend and yesterday as well.
In Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or PoK, on May 12, killing one police officer and injuring about 100. The violence followed several days of peaceful protests against high taxes, electricity bills and rising inflation, resulting in disruptions in Muzaffarabad, which is PoK's capital and the epicenter of the protests. Schools, businesses and markets remain shut. Activists of the Awami Action Committee, or the AAC, have been holding peaceful wheel jam and shutdown strikes since May 10th. The protests are a reflection of economic frustrations rooted in the Pakistani government's alleged negligence and elitism in handling PoK. Protesters demand basic amenities such as water, electricity and wheat be made available and affordable amidst soaring prices.
10 मई से मुसलसल एक एहतजाज चल रहा है। कबल अज़ीं तकरीबन 10 माह हो गए हम रोडों पर खड़े हैं और हम ये मुतालबा कर रहे हैं कि जो हमारे वसाइल रियासत जम्मू कश्मीर के उनके ऊपर हमारी जो अवाम है, जो यहाँ पे रहने वाले लोग हैं, उनका हक़ मलकियत तस्लीम किया जाए। हम ये चाहते हैं कि जो यहाँ से इन पानी से बिजली पैदा हो रही है, इस पानी जो बिजली है ये हमें रियायती निर्खों पर दी जाए और जो जिस पानी से पंजाब में, सिंध में गंदम पैदा हो रही है, वो आटा, वो गंदम हमें सब्सिडाइज दी जाए और हम उस वक्त तक रोडों पर खड़े हैं जब तक हमारे ये जो जायज़ कानूनी और अखलाकी मुतालबात पूरे नहीं होते, हम अपनी जदोजहद से पीछे नहीं हटेंगे.
The demonstrations turned violent after an alleged crackdown by the Pakistani security forces. According to reports, Pakistani police resorted to the use of tear gas canisters and bullets on unarmed civilians. As a result, more strikes were called across PoK, in places like Mirpur and Rawalakot. On May 11th, about 70 leaders and activists were arrested in overnight raids. In response, the AAC has vowed to hold more demonstrations opposing the crackdown. These developments threaten the newly elected Pakistani government's stronghold in the region. Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has condemned the violence and lawlessness, urging his officials to negotiate with representatives of the AAC. The demonstrations have been going on for 4 days now. The Pakistani government convened a meeting on Sunday to address the situation. What comes out of the meeting could determine whether violent protests continue or die down in the troubled nation. This is Debanjali Biswas for NDTV.
Well, joining us to understand the current state of affairs in Pakistan, we have with us Michael Kugelman, Director, South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Thanks so much, Michael, as always, for making time for us. Shehbaz's resignation, it comes amidst internal tensions within the ruling party in Punjab and at the federal level, as we witness. Help us understand what Nawaz Sharif's return to the post of party chief would mean for Pakistan, and secondly, Pakistan's neighbours. Will it be fairly good news?
Well, I think that this development is the latest indication that Nawaz Sharif is going to be a very key and influential figure in this Pakistani government, even though, of course, he does not hold any type of cabinet or any type of formal role at all. The fact that he had been disqualified from office some years ago has essentially been reversed by recent new rulings that essentially say that disqualifications only last for 5 years. And so this is one of the new developments that Shehbaz Sharif was referring to that have allowed Nawaz Sharif to come back and take back that role of party chief. And of course, he's been acquitted in a number of the cases that were held against him. So his fortunes have changed in a big way. It was very clear even before Shehbaz Sharif stepped down that Nawaz was going to be a key figure in this government, not on official levels, behind the scenes. And that's clearly going to be the case even more now that he's back at the top of the party that is leading this coalition government. Now, I would argue that one reason why he was in a position to come back to Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, some months ago, clearly there was some arrangement with the military that allowed it to happen. I think that the goal was for him to come back and be that person in the party that would try to galvanize and energize the PMLN base to put the party in a good position to do well in the election. We now know that the PMLN did not do all that well in the election, but still, Nawaz has been making a comeback for quite some time. And of course, an interesting question now is, what does this mean for India? What does it mean for Pakistan's relations with India that you have someone, Nawaz Sharif, who on a number of occasions in recent years has called for trying to push for better ties with India, at least through trade. Now he's going to be in an even more greater position of influence to try to push that position if he chooses to do so.
Right. Meanwhile, amid the ongoing protests in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, our External Affairs Minister has reiterated India's stand. Dr. Jaishankar has said that one day we will end the illegal occupation of the PoK and PoK will join with India. Michael, is this likely to ruffle feathers and irk Pakistan's current dispensation?
Well, of course, and this is not the first time that we have heard this type of messaging from India in this regard. But I think that given where things are now, given the views of Pakistan and the Pakistani government and the broader Pakistani political elite and the strategic elite and the military views about the Modi government, which are clearly very negative, very critical, I think that makes Pakistan even more concerned when you hear this rhetoric and this messaging from the External Affairs Minister in India, or from anyone else for that matter in India, And of course, given what is happening right now, these images that you're showing on your screen, what's happening now in Pakistan-administered Kashmir is going to make the Pakistanis even more concerned when you start to hear this type of messaging from India. But look, my sense is that Pakistan has no interest in a crisis with India. It has so much going on at home with its various internal crises,
Right.
economic, political, resurgence of militancy. It doesn't want to have to deal with a new crisis with India. So I think that certainly it's concerned and unhappy about this type of messaging from India, but I don't think that Pakistan will want to view that as some type of escalation.
Well, Michael, thank you so much as always for joining us on NDTV 24/7. The Pakistan government has allocated 23 billion Pakistani rupees for immediate release to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir in order to quell the simmering unrest in the region, where the situation remains tense for the 5th day. The other big story we're tracking on NDTV, 8 years after concluding the general framework of cooperation on the Chabahar port in Iran, India and Iran have signed a 10-year contract for its operation. Now, this long-term agreement was actually signed between Indian Ports Global Limited and Port and Maritime Organization of Iran, enabling operation of the Shahid Beheshti terminal. Subsequently, IPGL will invest approximately $120 million in equipping the port. India has also offered a credit window equivalent to $250 million for mutually identified projects aimed at improving Chabahar-related infrastructure. But the United States has warned that anyone considering business deals with Iran, they need to be aware of the potential risk of sanctions. We actually have a reaction from the US government for you, followed by Mohammad Ghazali's detailed report.
So broadly, Sean, you've heard us say this in a number of instances. Any entity, anyone considering business deals with Iran, they need to be aware of the potential risk that they are opening themselves up to and the potential risk of sanctions.
Ports and Shipping Minister Sarbananda Sonowal signed a crucial long-term agreement for India's operations at the strategic Chabahar port in Iran on Monday. This agreement, set to span over a decade with automatic renewal clauses, has been under negotiation between the two nations for approximately 3 years. The new agreement, which will be valid for 10 years, is intended to replace the original contract inked in 2016, which only covered operations at the Shahid Beheshti terminal of Chabahar port and has been renewed on a yearly basis. India, which has financed the expansion of Chabahar port, will be able to run it once the deal is agreed upon with Iran. This is the first time India will take over management of a port overseas. Chabahar port is said to have a strategic importance for both Iran and India, and it is believed that it can potentially help Iran ward off the effect of Western sanctions, as well as offer India an alternative route that bypasses Pakistan. Chabahar port serves as a counterbalance to Pakistan's Gwadar port and China's Belt and Road Initiative. There are plans to integrate Chabahar with the international north-south transport corridor, which will help facilitate India's access to Afghanistan and Central Asia without any dependency on Pakistan. INSTC is a 7,200 kilometer long multi-mode transport project for moving freight among India, Iran, Afghanistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Russia, Central Asia and Europe. The visit of Shipping Minister during a crucial poll campaign reflects the importance of the pact that has been in the making for some years now. India's vision is to economize the movement of cargo between India and Central Asia, and the Chabahar port would act as a commercial transit center for the region. It all began in 2002 when Hassan Rouhani, who was serving as a national security advisor to then President Syed Mohammad Khatami, held a discussion with his Indian counterpart Brajesh Mishra. The next year, Khatami visited India and signed a roadmap of a strategic partnership with the then Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. One of the key projects of the strategic partnership was Chabahar port. Later, India grew closer to Bush administration-led US government, and further sanctions on Iran slowed down the growth of the project.
Well, let's turn our attention now to Russia. Well, to Vladimir Putin, appointing a new defense minister provides a new building block towards fighting a long war. That was actually evident in Moscow when Andrei Belausov, an economist who was Mr. Putin's surprise pick to lead Russia's sprawling defense ministry, made his first public appearance in his new role and spoke about bureaucracy rather than the battlefield.
Московского гарнизона параду Победы готовы. Генерал армии Шойгу.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin has replaced his Minister of Defense with an economist, shaking up his national security team for the first time since his invasion of Ukraine and signaling his determination to put Russia's war effort on an economically sustainable footing. Russia asserts that their ballooning defense budget warranted putting an economist in charge, so Andrei Belousov, long been seen as one of Putin's most trusted economic advisors, will now be the new defense chief. Putin kept Sergei Shoigu in his inner circle, tapping him to run the country's Security Council, a position giving Mr. Shoigu close access to the president but little direct authority. Sergei Shoigu will replace Nikolai Patrushev, a former KGB colleague of Putin.
Очень важно вписать экономику силового блока в экономику страны. Вписать с тем, чтобы она соответствовала динамике нынешнего момента. И второе, наверное, что важно отметить, это сегодня на поле боя побеждает тот, кто открыт, больше открыт для инноваций, больше открыт для максимально оперативного внедренчества. И поэтому, естественно, что на нынешнем этапе президент принял решение, чтобы Министерство обороны возглавил гражданский человек.
While a possible shift in Mr. Shoigu's stature was telegraphed last month when the Russian authorities arrested one of his top deputies on corruption charges, this cabinet shift represents a rare overhaul for Putin, who tends to avoid rash changes, and they could mark a turning point in Russia's more than 2-year war in Ukraine. With the Russian military having gained the battlefield initiative, Putin is signaling a greater willingness to make changes and to show that Russia has the discipline and economic capacity to wage a long war. It is unclear how much authority over the war Mr. Shoigu will retain. While his new job parallels that of the American president's national security advisor, analysts say that in Putin's Russia, the role has limited influence because it does not directly control the military or a security agency. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV. Well, joining us for a quick comment to decode Putin's rare cabinet shakeup, we have with us Russia affairs expert Professor Anuradha Chenoy, who's also the former dean of the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at JNU. Thank you so much, Professor Chenoy, for making time for us. Is it fair to say that Andrei Belousov's appointment signals Putin's focus on subordinating the country's economy to his military needs in the expectation that a war in Ukraine, or at least a militarized standoff with the West, could shape Russia's future for years to come?
Well, look, this Belousov is an extremely capable and very experienced person within the Russian economic setup. He was in the Soviet Gosplan in the 80s when he was younger. He predicted the 2008 economic crisis.
Right.
He is a statistician, economic statistician, and he will even further rev up the defense and industrial complex. So he will balance, he will not just push the military industrial complex, but he will also balance the growing Russian economy. He is very smart on that. It's a brilliant choice. He's non-corruptible. And Shoigu actually, now the Russian president election was there and Putin was re-elected. It is not that rare to change your cabinet when the president takes oath again. So, and the change is very minor. I think Shoigu has gone into what they call the Russian Defense Council, which means meets every Tuesday. It has all the heads of all the departments, economic and military. So he will be there within the government. But Belousov is very capable, and I think you'll see a spurt in the growth of the Russian economy even more than has been evident in the past 2 years. So he already was tackling the issue of sanctions. The sanctions by the US and the West on Russia have been the largest number of sanctions on any country. They were supposed to be devastating, but they've had the opposite effect. Russian economy is actually surging. The inflation rates are low. There's manufacturing is going up in every aspect, and the sanctions hasn't impacted them. And they're producing more weapons than the entire combined West combined.
Yes.
So their defense industry is doing remarkably well, and it has been shown out on the battlefield theater. And I think our own military experts would say how Russian weaponry, how effective it has been, and how it's been able to demolish NATO weaponry, really. So
there's no denying that Putin's
will continue with this, right?
At this point, I don't think there's any denying that Putin's pick actually does reflect an acknowledgement that the military production that is supplying Russia's war and heating its economy must be carefully managed to sustain a war of attrition with Ukraine. In fact, some experts also assert that Putin's priority is war, and war of attrition is only won by economics. But thank you so much, Professor Chinoy, for joining us for that quick comment. As always, news and updates continue on NDTV. We're stepping into a very short break. Welcome back. Let's get you the latest as far as the trial of the former US President Donald Trump is concerned. Well, it has all the elements of a made-for-TV thriller. A sex scandal, politics, potential consequences for the future of the Republic. One problem, no TV. Cameras and audio recording devices have been banned from the Lower Manhattan courtroom that is hosting the first ever criminal proceeding against a former president. But Michael Cohen, the key prosecution witness in Donald Trump's hush money case, has now testified against the former US president in one of the most widely anticipated days in court since this trial began. Michael Cohen has testified that it was fair to describe his role as being a fixer for Trump, testifying that he took care of whatever he wanted. Rather than work as a traditional corporate lawyer, Cohen reported directly to Trump and was never part of the general counsel's office for the Trump organization. You know, among his duties were renegotiating bills from business partners, threatening to sue people, and planting positive stories in the press. This is what Mr. Cohen has said on record. Trump's former personal lawyer and fixer told the court that he lied and bullied on behalf of his former boss. In other crucial news, more than 3 lakh Palestinians have fled the town of Rafah in southern Gaza. This is what the main United Nations agency aiding the Palestinians in Gaza has confirmed. Israel, meanwhile, appears poised to expand its military operation there. Aid groups say no place is left in the enclave that can safely hold all the Palestinians being forced to flee, as costs for basic necessities rise. Just imagine a tent sells for $1,000 and a typically $13 taxi ride from Rafah to the nearby safety zone is now a whopping $270 as per a Bloomberg report. Even as Washington escalates threats to avert Israel's Rafah offensive, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned it could result in anarchy. Several US government officials have resigned over the White House's Israel policy, including a Pentagon intelligence officer who actually, in a rare public departure, cited his shame and guilt over the US's support for Israel. Well, thank you so much for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.